As Bitcoiners are always focused on new things, new ways of getting information, of course, Bitcoiners largely spread their own ideas through meetup culture. As a Bitcoiner, pre-Bitcoin, I was a teacher. Well, I was a lawyer for a little while and involved in all that stuff. But even in a life before that, I was a teacher. So I'm always interested in education markets. They're just a thing that I'm curious about. I was actually a teacher in South Korea for a couple of years. And while I was a teacher in South Korea, they have this really amazing, I'm not saying it's a system I would prescribe to people. There's a lot of work and a lot of schooling there, but it's a really neat blend of private education and public education. And the teachers are really the clients. And when I think of education markets, when I think of the follow the money, so I'll give a quick preface in the show again. On this show, we like to follow the money. It's about the relationships we have with money. It's not about trading dollars for Bitcoin, Bitcoin for dollars. We don't care. It's about trading the relationship we have with money, whether it's dollars, and the commercial relationships that come about because of those dollars. So what I'm doing today is there was a quote I'm going to get to in a second. It was released yesterday from, it was a tweet actually, pardon me, from the Michigan Democrat Party. Now, on this show, we do not get stuck in the false binaries of Republican, Democrat. We don't get caught up on Keynesian versus Austrian school. We're not here for that, right? That's a lot of detail and really complicated. And I'm never going to tell you that I understand inflation and what's going on with macroeconomics, because I don't think anyone on earth does, really. It's too complicated. And that's kind of what we're criticizing central bankers for. But what we can do, so I'm going to be talking about this quote from the Democrat Party, but don't worry, I've got plenty of time to pick on Republicans after. So we won't be caught between the false binary choices of Republican, Democrat. We're going to show this third rail, this third way, the Bitcoin way today. So education markets. I'm going to try and do this really simply. It's a follow the money analysis. What are the commercial relationships in education? So the reason I picked the Democrat tweet yesterday is because they said this. Here's the full quote. Not sure where this parent quote, parents should control what is taught in schools because they are our kids, end quote, is originating, but parents do have the option to choose to send their kids to a hand-selected private school at their own expense if this is what they desire. True. I wouldn't disagree with anything in that statement. The purpose of public education in a public school is not to teach kids only what parents want them to be taught. I can agree with that. It is to teach them what society needs them to know. I can even get down with that. A little less, but yeah, they're on solid ground still. It's the final line. And this is why I talk about commercial relationships. The final line, the client of the public school is not the parent, but the entire community, the public. Wait a second. The client is the entire community, the public. That's what they said. All right. Is that true? Can you agree with that statement? Let's follow the money. Let's see the commercial relationships that are involved in the public education system, and then I'll contrast it with something going on in America today. So if you're not American, let me try to adapt some of this content to you. First of all, I put local taxes here. In America, local taxes are really important for education, super important. If you're around the world and you remember that show Beverly Hills 90210, 90210 was the zip code, right? That's what Beverly Hills was. That's why it was really important. If you remember sort of the storyline of that show, where you lived was important. The rest of, most people in the world, their state government or their federal government is largely responsible for education. America is a bit of a different country when it comes to that, local taxes. So for the context of what's going on here, that's important. And charter is a major American thing. It's not really around the world, but I'll explain that. So let's just look and definitely fact check me on this, right? But I think I have it right, and I think you'll all agree. The commercial relationships that we have for public schools start with local taxes. Right? They're the ones with the money. They get it from parents. Parents are involved at this point because they choose where they're going to live. As example of Beverly Hills 90210, they chose that zip code. So parents do have a huge role to play. And you always talk about parents when they're buying a house. Oh, it's a good school district. It's great. The kids can go to school. So a lot of the client side, when they say it's not the parents, well, parents do have a lot to do with funding when it comes to choosing houses, but it's a really difficult way to participate as a client. And I wouldn't even imagine most parents think of themselves as a education system client when they're buying their house, because there's a million other commercial considerations to take into account at that point. But nevertheless, we can at least identify that local taxes go to schools in the public school system, and then ostensibly the abilities of the school go to the children. But we don't pay children to go to school. So if we're just going to follow the money, let's just be completely plain and simple. The money goes from taxes to schools. Right, that's the end of it. I think we can all agree. I haven't mind read anyone. There's no, you know, I'm not trying to fool you. That's the commercial relationship that's most important. So when the Michigan Democrat Party tweets that the community is the client, is that exactly true, right? We don't pay the community. The community in some way gets a benefit from children, of course, being educated, right? That's great for every community. But the real client here, right? The real client, the one the schools are trying to serve, is where they get their money from, right? If you're serving ice cream, it's the people who eat ice cream that are your customers. If you're a school and you get all your money from local taxes, well, those are the people you have to pay attention to. And I think with COVID, we've seen that more and more. The teachers union, for example, which negotiates collective bargaining agreements with the education system. We saw all the kinds of rules that came around with masking and when students would be open. And so in the end, we saw who the clients were. The school boards had to agree with the larger governments and entities paying for them, right? So that was pretty apparent throughout COVID and is still apparent today. But something happened. Something called charter schools, which were available in New York City and California and a few jurisdictions around the United States, have become much more popular after COVID. A fellow named Corey DeAngelis, if you don't follow him, you really should. Corey DeAngelis is a great guy on Twitter, pushing this almost single-handedly, the issue of school choice, they call it, charter schools. And what happens with charter schools is you've got taxes, a much wider base now, not necessarily local taxes, because they do come from a larger collection from state, sometimes federal. There's some federal involvement in this type of schooling, less now, but I believe there was at one point. What happens then is the parents, right, really become the client. The parents become the client. The students aren't the client in this situation either. The parents are the client, because the way charter works, for those of you who don't know, is think of it as a coupon. So say your child would get $20,000 for going to the public school system in Florida and a few other states in the United States now. You can actually get a coupon for that. Instead of the $20,000, you get what amounts to $20,000, which you can then shop and spend at a charter school. So it infuses market forces into the school decision process and really does make the parents the client, because their ability to shop and discern one product from another, in this case a school, it really comes down to their own discrimination, really, right? They want a good one, not that one. So you could send your kids to a yoga school, you can send your kids to a sports school, you can send your kids to an art school. A lot of these voucher schools, charter schools, are based on these principles. So and what we've seen now in the United States, because of the COVID mandates and the loss of faith in the public school system and the confusion around masking and all these other things, what we've seen is almost 30 states in the American Federation, 50 states, right? 30 have now gone outside of the school union system, the federal teachers union system, which opposes charter schools greatly and advocates for only public. So what this has done is it's actually crippled the lobby against charter schools. And charter schools are really getting a lot of momentum now as a result. So you're seeing the American system start to blend between public and charter. So here's where things start to get really interesting when we follow the financial relationship. So in this case, there are still taxes. Parents are the ones giving them to the schools. The schools then transfer that money into cash and can pay themselves, right? So they get some form of licensing from a state entity to be able to turn that voucher or that coupon into cash to pay the school. Now, this all works, but I'm a major proponent of this second system here. I think charter schools really do work, but there's a problem with it. There is one problem with it, and it has a limit to its shelf life, if you will, and that's where the Bitcoin financial relationship really does come in. And I'll bring it back to those binaries and what I mentioned about Democrats and Republicans. So in the very black and white of education right now, in those false dichotomies, those false choices, Democrats are certainly for a public school system. I mean, that I think we can say pretty safely and not generalize too much. It is very much funded by teachers' unions. There's a lot of overlap there between these groups, right? Like it or not, it's a fact. Now, here's where things, for me anyway, started to change, and where you start to realize that you were stuck in a false dichotomy. And that's why we call this show The Breakup. It's about letting relationships go that you thought were real or important, and ideas that you had that you ascribed all kinds of meaning to, but maybe aren't really true and do keep you stuck in these false binaries. And that, with the spirit of MLK yesterday, I remember in the summer of 2020, when a lot of the protests were going on about systemic racism and all that kind of stuff. And I said, well, where is it in America? I ended up seeing it very clearly when you really take an honest look at the education system. It certainly has a lot of inbuilt systemic racism, both in the public aspect. And then even I thought about it as you're doing the soul searching, I think a lot of people did in that time, in that summer of 2020, what I realized was a lot of those conservative ideas around charter schools, as much as I support them and as great as they are, focus quite a bit on parents being the clients. This red line that I have underlined here is to show who the client is. So I disagree with the Democrat Party statement in Michigan that the community is the client. It's not. The people who are giving the tax money to the school, they're the client, right? The administrators, the one collecting tax money, giving it to the schools. In the charter school system, it's an improvement. We've migrated the client to the parent, and they're discerning. But here's the trick. Here's where you get brainwashed from binary partisan politics. Is it really an option for everybody in the world that we just have better parents who act more like clients and are better shoppers for school? It works for many people. It works for probably the majority. But there's a portion of the population it's not going to help them. And it's wishful thinking. And in fact, it's not empathetic, right? You're not really thinking about the people in your world. You're saying, well, here I can be right. It's a bit like the Austrian versus Keynesian school accounting thing, if that's how we're going to settle Bitcoin, by an accounting argument, right? Where our math is better than your math, therefore Bitcoin is great. It's not exactly that, right? So when you think about it, well, it's an easy solution. If everyone just has better parents, if parents don't get divorced, all our problems are solved. But that's not in the cards. It's not even close. There's a lot of kids who need a lot of help. And that's why when I look at what I do and what a lot of Bitcoiners are doing, and you're seeing this trend throughout the world, it's not just Bitcoiners, it's no school. I don't even call it homeschool. It's no school, right? It's no school. And if it's no school, what ends up happening is Bitcoiners like myself start seeing all children as clients, in the sense that they go to community places. And as a member of a community, you invest your time and your energy in making sure the places where the kids spend their time and spend their energy and learn their things are infused with all of your energy and your talent and your ability, right? So I mean basketball groups and even Bitcoin, right? So leading Bitcoin meetups and involving yourself in your community. In that way, you're able to be the parents of all the kids out there who don't have parents who are going to be the discerning shoppers for them to take advantage of the charter school systems. We can't just relegate all kids to the system. And there's a few other things Bitcoiners can even do upstream of that. I think of credentialism instantly, right? So if we're going to get away from this education system, part of it has to do with saying, well, I'm not going to just take a kid from Harvard in this job right now because they have a fancy degree or whatever, right? You see a kid who dropped out of college and was mining Bitcoin and did a few other things, and now they have a really good writing skill. As a Bitcoiner, you got to favor that person, because downstream, we can't still have these credentialist institutions deciding who gets to do what job later in life. That's kind of one of those financial relationships we have to break. You don't see that on the back end of all this, right? When people go into buying houses and making real estate decisions, acting like a client for their kid when it comes to choosing their schools in a really convoluted and complicated way. Buying a house, for God's sakes, right? It's a complicated way to participate in school system. And then you see it, trickle down, and it changes. The client here is the parent, but there's still gaps, right? There's still gaps. And while a lot of kids without good parents can definitely make it to the charter school system, get a degree at college and be great, right? I foresee that happening. Once again, I am a proponent of the charter school system and do not want to put any obstacle in its way from being successful. But you've got to think one step later, right? We can't relegate all these people to a life where no one's going to pay attention to their education, because there is a whole swath of kids that are going to need people to educate them on things that are really important. And it can't be done as a low-level admin assistant learning how to sit still for 8 hours in a school. right? It has a lot to do with making sure the communities we live in are really healthy, and the parks are in good shape. That could even mean just fixing your local park. I mean, really, it doesn't take much more than that, but it does involve community engagement more than it ever has. You simply can't be an anonymous person and hope that everyone gets educated properly. Yesterday on the show, we were talking about financial relationships that go into energy, and how important those are. And you've got to create a better energy matrix for everyone. And it's important for Bitcoiners, if we get that right, to not have Schadenfreude, right? To not enjoy other people's failure, right? This is kind of the same. There's things that threaten Bitcoin's survival and health that aren't technical. They're about the relationships and decisions we make. In the case of energy, right, we've got important decisions to make. And when it comes to education, involving yourself in your community, make sure we don't have a bunch of idiots around, idiots, right? That our kids aren't living amidst people who were educated without anyone who gave a damn. And so that's really, I think, the message that I want to take today and share with you, that we have to break up with certain relationships, credentialism in particular, and start breaking apart some of the commercial relationships that go into a school system that ain't working for anybody, and help support other commercial relationships that'll get us a little further to where we want to go, but importantly have, I think, a system, right? Bitcoiners have a system where we can see a world where there's no school because we don't require credentialism in order to get ahead when you're an adult, the upstream effect, and that our communities are healthy and that the people living in them can be raised by everyone who's got time and energy and effort. So that's today's episode. You can find more of the content. Please follow me at CountBTC on Twitter. And sometimes I'll be uploading these on YouTube as well, but that's my show for today.
Awesome. Great to have you, Nolan. Thank you. This is a great day two, the debut of your show. And I think everybody's really enjoying it.
I hope so, guys. I hope it makes sense. It's about relationships. It's about seeing where the money goes, right? Follow the money, but we're not mega investigators here. It's just follow the money. Who is dealing with who, and what's the output, right? Yesterday we talked about the output of people's desire to solve global warming and then choosing the right energy matrix. And we said the commercial relationships just didn't really get us there. We have an oil market for dollars that's doing fine. The ESG market, shaky, not on demand. And certain forces have put an end to any ability to have a relationship between money and nuclear power that would allow us to all benefit and solve some of the problems we have. And today, it really is about the commercial relationships in school. And really, the important effect is this red line here. What you want to see is the client go from the person collecting taxes, insane, but that's what we built. It worked 50 years ago, I guess, but it sucks now. I mean, if you could buy a house wherever you want and they were all cheap, sure, it works fine, right? Then it's okay. If it's the 1950s again and someone pumping gas can buy a house on one income, great, right? Then the system's just fine. But nowadays, I mean, go buy a house in a nice school district and see what else you got. See what other problems you have to solve first to get there, right? They're not easy. So it really shows the client of the system going from taxes to parents. And then in the no school system, it literally is where the kids are having fun and showing up, right? If they're showing up there, we're going to fund it, right? If it keeps my kids playing with other Bitcoin kids and gives me time to chat Bitcoin with some other parents, I'll spend money on that every day, right? I'll spend money on that every day.
I've seen a lot of those like no school programs where they have, what is it? They pull together 6 families, will all chip in. They pay a teacher. The teacher's going to make a lot more than they would have ever made public or private school. Your kid is going to get much more hands-on. To be honest, that I think that's the solution that I'd like to see going forward.
Yeah. But for me, where it's important for Bitcoiners is that we recognize, so that it totally checks out for 60, 70% of people, right?
Right.
You know, lots of parents pay close attention to their kids' education, but we can't, Bitcoin is a battle of the hearts and minds here. It really is. And when the last boss comes, when the confrontation between the forces at work in the world and Bitcoin have their head-on collision, it's my opinion that if we don't turn those hearts and minds, we're in for trouble, right? So it's not just to make a better world, it's self-preserving. I'm not, you know.
Bitcoin is inevitable. Thanos said so.
There you go.
All right. Great to have you on, Nolan. Looking forward to chatting with you tomorrow again.
Thanks a lot, Shane.